celebrate those small successes, because if we don't celebrate the small successes, then we're just setting ourselves up for failure.
Hi, I'm Kira Yakubov, licensed marriage and family therapist and founder of Heal Your Roots Wellness Practice. Every episode, we talk with a professional from the mental health field to learn more about their approaches and specialties, and also their journey of becoming a therapist. In this podcast, we'll uncover a deeper look at the world of therapy from new perspectives. You'll meet the therapists of Heal Your Roots Wellness Practice and trusted colleagues from the community tackling mental well-being. We're your go-to network for practical and professional insight in mental health. Subscribe for new episode releases every other Wednesday.
I'm excited for today's episode. Our guest is Gabrielle Larin, licensed marriage and family therapist, and one of our newest therapists at Heal Your Roots Wellness. Gabby, it's so nice to have you on today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So first thing that we always start with is asking the therapist, how did you become a therapist? What made you get into the field? And if you can kind of share a little bit of your backstory.
Part of my personal life, I actually went to therapy from age 15 to 18, and I experienced so much growth through therapy, and I realized that I wanted to help others grow in similar ways.
That's awesome. So that's interesting that it sounds like your parents, I wanted to initially say they allowed you to go to therapy. That's my own cultural background of saying that, but it sounds like your family encouraged that for you and were supportive of you going to therapy.
Yeah, it's funny. Both me and my sister are both working in therapy. So she's a social worker. And we both kind of grew up in this field, and it's been very open about, going to therapy and talking about therapy. And, as you're saying, the cultural aspect, my cultural background, you didn't really talk about it, sweep it under the rug type of thing. But, therapy is where you talk about things. So it was very helpful to have that space to be open.
Awesome. Yeah, the cultural aspects definitely has a huge influence and impact on how we kind of view ourselves and feelings and where we feel safe to share a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, and that's where I want to be that safe space for people.
Yeah. And so what made you pick particularly marriage and family therapy as a focus?
I actually, all the classes that I took in undergrad and college, I really loved human sexuality. That was my favorite. And one of my other classes was, I can't remember what it was called, but it was something about philosophy and love. And I learned a lot in that class. And it was a place that you could really talk about things that I had never talked about before, especially in a classroom environment. It was almost like taboo to talk about. So I did like that, again, this kind of space to talk about those things. And that started my attraction towards it.
And so for the listeners, we actually met in grad school in our marriage and family courses. And I think we actually had human sexuality together in grad school.
Oh, yeah.
Which was a funny class. Yeah, but that was like before we kind of talked to each other until the marriage and family specific courses.
Right. Yeah. I like talking about things that, like I was saying, are kind of taboo and you're not really supposed to, quote, talk about, those types of things. It's not appropriate, again, quotes, but I like talking about those things.
Yeah. And so what was some of your experience out of grad school, like once you started working with, whether it was like individuals or couples or families, that kind of got you started with that process?
I have a wide variety of different types of jobs that I had. I worked in mobile therapy, alternative high school, family-based therapy, chemical dependency unit, so basically a rehab at a psychiatric hospital, outpatient therapy with children and teenagers, and individual therapy with adults. So kind of all over the place.
And so what was kind of the, I don't want to say favorite, well, maybe favorite, but like what you kind of took from all those things that made you kind of settle into what you want to focus on now, which we'll touch on in a little bit?
Because I do have such a wide variety of background and experience, I got to really find out what I enjoyed the most and what I feel so passionate about. And I like to work with teenagers and young adults with depression and anxiety and low self-esteem. That's kind of my, I guess, like you're saying, favorite. It is my favorite to work with. I like to work with all types of people and all groups of people, but those are kind of my specialty.
And so I know you also, when you mentioned like the mobile therapy and family-based therapy, like that's pretty tough work. I mean, all of your experiences seem like all over the board, but really intense work and so different from one another. What was that family therapy like, having everybody in the room?
Family-based therapy is really intense. It's what family-based therapy is, it's a step under when a parent is kind of like, I've had enough. I really need a break. I'm thinking of either putting this kid in inpatient or in respite or residential, pretty much just removing from the home. And family-based is the kind of last straw of seeing like, will this work? So it's very intensive, very intentional in, you talk about things head on. So that it was intense. I did that for about 2 years. And then I started being like, all right, this is a lot. Maybe I should take a little step back. But I did love it because it was intense. For that time, I loved working with the families who, were needing that extra help and extra support. I liked to see the differences. It's also in an 8-month period. So it's long enough, but it is pretty short in the long run. You have to do a lot. And I did like seeing the changes from the beginning to the end. You could really see a difference. And that felt nice to be a part of making that difference.
Yeah. And I mean, family-based, it's like, it sounds super intense, but just thinking about all those different personalities in the room and like meeting a family while they're in crisis, basically, and trying to like, all right, we have to work this out like right now or pretty soon, or something severe or big is going to happen. And I'm wondering, like, how is that for you to see all these different perspectives and like generations kind of working through each other, plus the layer of like culture on top of that? Because I'm sure there was different cultures that came through with the families as well.
Right. No two people are the same. So it's kind of exciting to see different people interact, different types of people interacting, whether within that one family or within different families. It's kind of like you have to mold to the people that you're in front of. You have to kind of change, not your outlook, but how you are working. You have to kind of help them as they need to be helped, not how you want to help. You have to meet them where they are at. And it's a pretty quick adjustment that has to happen. But if you are in that mindset, you kind of just like have to figure it out. And it was very helpful for me to go through that, to be able to feel more competent within myself as a therapist.
Sure. I mean, it sounds like you have to be super adaptable and on your feet. Like, I think sometimes people think that we have like this whole plan laid out, and sometimes we do. And then we show up to session. It's like, nope, that shit's right out the window. Yep. You have to be super present and figure out like what is occurring right in front of you and like managing all of this at once. Oof, that's a lot. I imagine that definitely helped, like, confidence wise, especially starting out as an early on therapist too.
Yeah, it was helpful. And, that imposter syndrome still kicks in sometimes, but if I for myself, for self-esteem, as we're talking about, I have to tell myself if I can handle that, I can handle this,
Absolutely. I feel like if you've gone through the worst, not the worst, but the most intense, that everything else kind of seems a little bit easier or more manageable for sure. And so I know you mentioned that the depression, anxiety, and really working on self-esteem with teens and young adults is like really like your sweet spot, what you really like to focus in on and enjoy working with. Is there something in particular about that age group or that kind of presenting issue that feels really rewarding or that has drawn you in?
In terms of rewarding, even as I said with the family base, it's great to see the before and after. I will work with people who in the past, I'm thinking of a specific example. This one kid had suicidal ideation. He was just down in the dumps. He felt terrible about himself, just no self-worth at all. And I'm a huge fan of baby steps, slow and steady. So you can't rush into that. You can't make someone feel better about themselves just by telling them good things. So it's like a slow and steady process to help them believe it about themselves. And seeing people and seeing this kid feel slowly better about himself and seeing his self-worth and seeing his internal struggle start to decrease, it's just so rewarding. And I feel proud of them when they can do it themselves. And it's even better when they feel proud of themselves to be able to do it, because it doesn't matter who am I? It doesn't matter if I'm proud of them. It matters if they are, because they're the ones who are coming here to get that help. And once they can feel proud of themselves for the changes, then that's where the real work happens.
That's beautiful. And it's like so life-changing, right? Like even if we think about these little tiny baby steps, they may not seem like anything huge or that impactful, but when we add it up and with that momentum over time, and then you see this person, their body language, how they talk about themselves, how they interact in relationships, how that changes, it is pretty rewarding and amazing to see.
It is. And you have to show them those baby steps, because a lot of times people won't, like you're saying, you can't see it when you're in it. And it's easier to see, remember yourself 6 months ago versus today. So I'm big on praising and kind of like inspiring and showing the positive side, because of course you have to be in the pain. You have to be in the sadness and the anger and the frustration and all of those negative emotions. Let yourself feel that, as well as reminding yourself that, you have to feel those positives too. And you have to celebrate those small successes, because if we don't celebrate the small successes, then we're just setting ourselves up for failure.
I love that. It's balancing the two, right? Because it's always easy to think of the worst case scenario or how horrible things are. And it's like, okay, that can be true and is true, but there's this whole other side here that's positive that we can be grateful for, that is also pretty accurate and true happening right now. So it sounds like you're the biggest cheerleader in the room and you really help them like see that perspective in addition to, the shitty things that are coming up and part of reality as well.
Right. You can't just focus on the positives, because that's not reality. That's not real life. You have to feel the pain. And I feel like, I don't know if you've seen that movie. I've worked with kids most recently. So that movie, oh my goodness, the one with the emotions, the Pixar movie.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I can't think of the name.
Inside Out. That was
Inside Out. That was such a good one.
It's so good, but it's like you have to feel the sadness in order to appreciate the happiness. And I am a big fan of that, because you have to feel those negative emotions. You have to allow yourself to experience those things. You can't hide them. You can't push them down. You can't internalize them. You have to feel them. Let yourself get through that so that you can get to the other side of appreciating the positives in your life.
Absolutely. I love these cartoons and movies now coming out to like really personify this stuff for kids. Like I love watching Pixar movies. I'm like, there's so many good morals and values going on in these things that I wish that we had when we were kids, instead of like the Disney ones where it was like not the best messages, but
the prince has to save you. I can save myself.
Oh man. And so I know that a big part of your identity and how you show up in the room, or just like how you are with clients, is your background. Would you mind sharing a little bit about like your cultural background?
My parents were born and raised in Dominican Republic, so I consider myself to be Dominican American. I speak Spanish, although I don't in sessions. And I go to Dominican Republic to visit my family at least once a year. When I was little, I would go for 5 weeks at a time, but unfortunately that has changed. As I've gotten older, the time has gotten less and less. But so my culture is very Dominican. I'm very family oriented. I we're the only people that are in this country. So I'm very familiar and comfortable and connected to Hispanic culture, specifically Dominican Republic, but I can connect with people of other Hispanic backgrounds as well.
And so I think that's so huge and such an advantage just in terms of being like a professional therapist, because you get to see such a different perspective of different cultures, and like not even just like the individualistic culture of American kind of background, but like the collective culture, which I'm assuming is a lot of Hispanic culture. And like I can relate to that, having like the Eastern European background, that also being a huge thing. And so I'm wondering, are there any bits that like would stand out or is super relatable for clients for you that maybe are Hispanic and maybe an American, like just a white American therapist may not understand, right? Because I get this a lot when I have Eastern European clients, like, oh, you just get it for certain things.
I would say a big one is that white American maybe will be like, I'm 18, so I'm an adult. And Hispanics are like, no, you're not. Like, you have to listen to your parents. When I remember my friends would tell me like, oh yeah, I can do whatever I want. I'm 18. I'm like, what? No, you can't. I have to listen to my parents. Like, that's just a part of the culture, is that, you know, your parents are the authority, so you have to respect them and kind of obey them and listen to what they're saying. They know more, they're more wise. So that's a big one.
That's really funny. That's really similar too. I remember like in high school, and like kids would be doing things like, as soon as I'm 18 or 21, parents like, I don't know who you think you are. Just because we brought you here doesn't mean shit.
Right.
You are still a baby. Unless you get married and have a husband, you are a child. I was like, damn, this sucks. Like,
I know. You have to adjust to, you know, being around all friends who, because that was another struggle, was, you know, my friends could stay out later, and I would have to, like, my friends would be hanging out and I would have to leave where everyone was and enjoying themselves and be like, oh, my curfew, I got to go home. So that was, you know, that was rough. But that, in that way, I can kind of understand and empathize with a lot of, especially teens or even young adults that are going through that. Because, you know, sometimes I'm 33 and I still have to deal with that sometimes.
You still have a curfew. That's so funny. That's so true, though. And I think that's really important for clients who have different backgrounds, is it adds this layer of like relatability, and like you just get it, you know, even because there's so many different Hispanic cultures, right? But even just having that background and being like, you know what, you just kind of get it. There's a certain level that you understand that I don't have to necessarily fully explain or teach you, that I think is such a relief to clients, that it's like, all right, you're part of this like community, you get it. I can just share it with you. We can laugh about some of it. Yes, it may be unhealthy, but like it's kind of part of what we do and how we are. So like, it's okay. It's not pathologized.
Right.
So that's awesome. So for the listeners out there, Gabby gets it.
I get it. I get it. And, you know, even with other cultures, I love to learn. I love to learn about other cultures. And maybe if I don't fully get it, explain it to me. Tell me about that. And I feel like that's a whole nother way of helping someone, because it's a two-way street. I feel like therapy is a relationship. It's not just me helping the client or, you know, learning about the client, but the client is doing the same with me, you know, teaching me different things, and maybe something that I learned in a session I can use to help someone else as well.
Absolutely. So it's interesting, right? Like having that relatability, but just knowing that you're open to different cultures allows people to also feel comfortable and be like, I can share this with you and you won't judge me in the same way, or you're more open to hearing what this might be like in my experience. And I think that is pretty healing for clients to explain it and also hear like, I never realized that this was like a core feature of my identity or my culture until now I'm explaining it to somebody that may not be a part of it. And it's like, either I really like this about it, or like, damn, that's kind of a little fucked up the way I was raised or the way that we think about certain things.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I feel like that kind of opens your eyes to a whole new way of thinking.
Yeah. And so I know that you also have another like soft spot or another specialty that you like to work with, the LGBTQIA plus community as well. Can you kind of share a little bit about that experience or kind of what that's been like for you to work with individuals from that community?
Yeah, so I have always been an ally. I've always been a huge advocate. And within working through therapy with people in the community, I think people, I don't want to like toot my own horn, but I feel like people feel comfortable.
Toot it.
Toot toot.
Yeah.
I feel like people feel comfortable in being open and honest with me. I mean, I try really hard to help people feel safe and comfortable with me. And I hope to help people find their journey. And whether that's finding a label that works for you or being okay with not having one, I would love to be helpful within that journey of finding yourself and being okay with maybe it changes from one day to the next or you never finding that. I just want to be supportive and I really want to help people feel okay with who they are.
And so it definitely comes off, right? I mean, I know you, so it helps having that feature of like being in class with you and also like so in grad school, we had these role plays, right? Where we record ourselves in a session. And I remember like watching and you feel so comfortable. Like it really felt like just talking to another person, right? So I think you do a really great job of just creating that safe, comfortable space to just share whatever is coming up for somebody that might be really scary to share to a family member or a friend, or even just saying it out loud. And so I think especially for people, whether they're questioning or unsure, or they are sure and they are nervous to tell other people about their sexuality or their gender, like having a therapist like you that is so open and honest and welcoming and such a huge cheerleader in that way, I think is so impactful for people to accept that about themselves and feel more safe and comfortable to share more of themselves in the world too.
Well, thanks. Toot toot for me.
Toot toot. All the toots.
No, I do appreciate that because I, part of that building that self-esteem is that you want to feel confident within yourself and you want to feel like not only are clients feeling empowered and confident within themselves, but I feel like as therapists, we also have to feel empowered and confident within ourselves in order to help our clients.
Yeah. I mean, right. It's part of like, you got to talk the talk or walk the, what is the saying? Walk the walk.
Yes, it's so true. You do. I always would tell in my outpatient job, I would always say, we have to practice what you preach. And if you want a client to be open and honest, if you want, family members within session to talk to each other open and honestly, whatever you want out of the clients, you have to be willing to do the same thing.
And I think that's a huge part of that human connection with a therapist is the relationship is so important for like any therapeutic work to happen, is that if you feel like your therapist is vulnerable or open or also expresses the similar things that they want to see in you or are helping you achieve, like you want to be able to feel that in a therapist too.
Exactly. Why would you open up to somebody if they're not doing it?
Yeah. Or if they're judgy, or if they come off with like closed off body language and they're asking you to be very open and vulnerable, like, this doesn't check out.
Right.
I don't think so. No, I wouldn't either. And so have you worked with clients where they've had, diverse cultural backgrounds, maybe diverse like sexuality or sexual orientations, dealing with anxiety, depression, like all of the layers together and helping them kind of, as they're all intertwined, take those pieces out and see how they overlap with each other too?
Yes. It actually is, it's definitely a challenge to have, different cultures, different identities, different mental health diagnoses all in one, because like you're saying, you kind of have to like take them apart and either work on one by one or find a common ground to help them through all of it together. So like I was even saying before, you kind of have to mold to the moment. You have to adjust in that moment. Maybe two things are connecting, or maybe nothing is connecting, or maybe there's one thing that can help with everything. You kind of have to figure that out in that moment of, or ask them. I feel like a lot of times people assume things, and when we are intentional and asking the client, I think that's very important, because not only are you getting more information and more background, but also they're feeling heard. A lot of times, you know, if you're just assuming something and it's completely wrong, the client's like, you're not listening to me. You don't know what I mean. You don't know what I'm talking about. So if you're asking them, even if you think it's a silly question, even if you think it's so obvious, if you ask, then maybe that could make the difference between how they are feeling.
Absolutely. Right. And I think, so this is like the pros and cons of being within the same culture or maybe the same like gender identity or sexual identity, is that because there's this level of understanding and relatability, sometimes we do assume that it's a similar experience without recognizing that every person is still unique, and every experience that they've had and every family member and relationship and, you know, school and job interaction that they've had is different than the one that you've had. And so I think it is really important, like you're saying, is to take the time to learn and make sure that just because we're similar in these ways, there's so many more differences as well.
Yeah. Like I was saying, no two people are the same. You could be growing up the exact same way. Twins are different. Everybody is different. There's similarities, but, you know, it's not synonymous.
Yeah. Maybe in a parallel universe, but even that's different. And so I know we're coming close to the end. Is there anything that you really want the listeners or future clients to know, or anything in general that you really like to share with clients, whether that's like specific homework or like approaches that you like to use with them?
I love to help clients understand. So I'm a big why person. You know, somebody will say something and I'll be like, well, why? What's behind it? Because I feel like in order to make changes, you have to understand what it actually is that's happening. You can't do anything about it if you don't understand it. So I will go back to kind of like the origin of finding out what happened. What are you feeling? Whether that's something about the past or whether that's an emotion behind a behavior, just why? What's going on? So once we pinpoint that, then we can make the changes to move forward. I'm a slow and steady process, and I think that that's helpful for not only changes, but to make the person feel comfortable in making those changes and to make them long lasting.
I think that's two of the most important parts, right? Is comfortable in making those changes, but it being long lasting.
I was going to say, you know, if you make a change quickly, it's going, okay, yeah, you'll make that change, but it's going to only happen for like a month or, you know, maybe a year. But if you do a slow and steady process and you really get into the nitty gritty and you get into finding out what's going on, why is this happening, and you really take the time to make those changes, they will be more impactful and more ingrained to make them more long lasting for the future.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I wonder if that is part of our training that we had, like that psychodynamic a little bit, is like really understanding like what is simmering under the surface that is kind of subconsciously influencing these decisions, right? Because having that awareness is so huge. That's like the biggest first step. And then practicing it or trying it, right? Like how many times do we say we want to do something after we realize why we're doing it? And it takes so long until we learn the consequences or the rewards attached to it and really implement it over and over again and feel the pain of like the growing pains, right? Of making these long lasting changes. So I love that you really like take the slow and steady approach. And, you know, sometimes that can be frustrating for therapists and or clients, right? Because a lot of time clients want to see things change really fast because A, they're probably in pain or they're suffering or they've been dealing with this for a long time, or they may just be impatient, right? And so it's also kind of getting them on the same page of recognizing that like, it's okay that it takes longer. It will probably mean that it will last longer too.
Right. We are loving the instant gratification. And I will definitely, as I will help find the quick Band-Aids in the meantime of working on the core issue.
So it's the now and later.
Yeah. Because, like you're saying, the impatient, like I can get impatient in that way as well. Sometimes you want to see some positive changes. So I get it. So you gotta work on that balance, like we were saying before. There's definitely a balance with it.
For sure. And trusting the process. As much as I kind of hate that, it is always trusting the process.
So cliche.
It's like, all right. Mm-hmm. Like EMDR, you have to trust the process with that. Like, whew.
It's always like,
that's a whole other
sometimes
session,
it'll get like worse before it gets better, but you got to trust the process.
I always like to tell clients, it's kind of like those acne commercials where like it gets worse before it gets better. It's like everything comes out until it starts to calm down. And that is kind of how therapy is, right? Like once you start peeling all these layers off, everything comes out and you kind of feel worse for a little bit because you're kind of hit in the face with all of these truths and realities. And then it's like, all right, now that I'm accepting it, now that I'm recognizing where and why it's coming from, it's okay. we can kind of move through this, and now I'm past this, and now I'm over the hump a little bit more.
Right. You have to climb the mountain to get to the other side.
We're full of one-liners today. And it was walk the talk. I was tongue-tied with that.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, Gabby, thank you so much for being on today. I'm glad that we got to hear more of your perspective and see your personality for all the future listeners. You are accepting new clients, and I'm really excited that you are a new member of Heal Your Roots Wellness. So thanks so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.